Well, an Atlanta area prosecutor is reportedly planning to present evidence to a grand jury this week as they weigh a potential indictment against former President Trump related to the 2020 election. So even though he was at the Iowa State Fair this weekend, there's still another looming case. This as the DOJ appointed special counsel David Weiss to oversee the Hunter Biden case when his plea deal fell apart. The legal chaos causing some big problems for President Biden, according to some Democrats, and former President Trump. As The Hill reports, has to deal with another nasty investigation. And Niall, Stanage, White House columnist for The Hill, I know you wrote about this over the weekend. Let's start with the Georgia case. So separate from the federal indictment, of course, it's feeling like Groundhog Day for a lot of Americans. How do we expect the former president's team to defend him in Georgia?
Well, we don't know for sure that he's going to be indicted, of course. That has to be decided this week. But I do think that the Georgia case, Adrienne, is really the sharpest legal arrow aimed at the former president, because he's on tape in that now infamous call to the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, in January 2021, pressuring Raffensperger to find him votes. It's very difficult to defend that call. The fact that this is a state case is also important, because it means that even if Mr. Trump were ultimately to be elected again, he couldn't pardon himself or call this case off, as he could with the federal cases.
The D.C. federal judge overseeing the 2020 election case warning Mr. Trump, as we've heard him warn before, not to say anything about the case that would intimidate witnesses or prejudice jurors. But for the former president, we've seen him be very vocal on his platform, Truth Social, regarding all of these cases. So what exactly does it mean for him to not speak up again?
Well, we have to see if he is willing to bend the knee in that respect, which would be highly uncharacteristic of him. There is a really interesting point here, Adrienne, which is that the judge is understandably concerned about witness tampering or witness intimidation. But on the other hand, the former president has a legitimate case to make that he has to be able to campaign freely. So let's say he takes issue with Mike Pence's version of events. Is he then a candidate attacking a rival candidate, as he clearly has a right to do? Or is he a defendant seeking to influence a potential witness against him? The answer is basically that he's both. So which of those rights take precedence? That's going to be very difficult to untangle, I think.
Meanwhile, the DOJ's appointment of a special counsel to oversee the Hunter Biden case may be surprising to some people. It's none other than the lead prosecutor, David Weiss again, his name coming up. What has lawmakers so concerned, both Democratic and Republican lawmakers?
On the Democratic side, I think it's just the fact that this is going to continue the investigation into Hunter Biden, and that's politically bad news for the president and for Democrats. On the Republican side, it's a more specific concern with David Weiss himself. You mentioned that he was the lead prosecutor. In that role, he was the person who struck, or at least was in charge of striking, the plea deal with Hunter Biden that Republicans deride as a sweetheart deal. And I think this is an important point, this is to some extent a validation of what those IRS whistleblowers said, particularly Gary Shapley, who was, I think Shapley has basically brought pressure to bear, which we're now seeing reflected in this appointment.
Yeah, and again, maybe giving more credibility to those two witnesses who some questioned from the beginning. But I think a lot of people would hope that this whole thing would go away, especially the Biden family, before the 2024 election season really kicks off. The White House seeming to kind of play mum, distancing themselves from all this. How much damage do you think this is doing to President Biden's run for the presidency? Or do you think essentially most Americans are tuning this all out?
It's an interesting question. I think a lot of Americans are more concerned with the so-called kitchen table issues of the economy or jobs or inflation, cost of living, things like that. Having said that, look, the White House never jumps for joy anytime Hunter Biden is in the news. Like, that is bad news for the White House automatically because of his rather sleazy,
shady,
goings-on, shady,
messy,
exactly,
complicated.
Yes, also. You keep going with the adjectives, and I'll just nod my head, Adrienne. That'll be fine.
We have to have a little fun today.
We do. I was wondering when it was going to kick in, and here we are.
There we go. The adrenaline and the caffeine worked.
Exactly. So look, it's shady, swampy, and all those other adjectives. So that's bad news by association for the president, though there is no wrongdoing as yet proven on President Biden's part.
Yeah, at worst, this is a criminal investigation. At the least, this is just another shady situation, and all of us can relate to having at least one family member with a muddled past. I think that's how Niall Stanage would describe it. Niall, thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne, for putting words in my mouth. Perfect.
Words that you agree with, for sure, yeah.
Of course, always.
AKA complicated. Thank you, Niall. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.